The single mom waitress got fired at 6 p.m. The mafia boss was waiting outside. 6 p.m. in New Orleans. The air was not air. It was a wet towel someone had used to wipe down a bar. June Arquette stood under the failing awning of cypress and grits, the fluorescent sign above her sputtering in time with the tremor in her hands. Mr. Henderson, the night manager, had made it a performance. He had waited for the dinner rush, for the booths to fill with tourists and tired locals. He had called her out, his voice oily and loud, accusing her of skimming the till. The register is short. June again. It was a lie. It was a setup. The missing cash was precisely the amount she had refused to pay him last week for scheduling security. She was 28, a single mother, and now, officially, unemployed. "Get your things," he had snapped, pointing a greasy finger toward the door. Her things amounted to a cheap canvas bag, now spotted with rain. The sky tore open, unleashing a heavy, humid downpour that smelled of the Mississippi River, of silt and decay. June pulled the thin strap over her shoulder, the only thought in her head a sharp, cold spike of panic. Rowan. Her son, 6 years old, was safe at their neighbor's. Miss Loretta would feed him, would read to him, unaware that June had just lost the job that paid for their cramped apartment, the job that kept Rowan's asthma inhalers supplied. June stepped off the curb, into the deluge. The water soaked her worn sneakers instantly. She had 2 blocks to walk to the bus stop. That was when the car appeared. It did not just arrive, it materialized out of the rain-slicked twilight. A black sedan so polished it reflected the bleeding neon of the bar next door. It stopped directly in front of her, idling with a low, predatory hum. A man stepped out. He moved with an economy of motion that was almost unnerving. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that seemed to repel the rain. He did not look at June. Instead, he walked to the front of the car and leaned against the hood, crossing his arms. He looked at the cypress and grits as if he were deciding whether to buy it or burn it. This was Silas Valario, in the bayou, in the hidden corridors of the French Quarter, in the shipping lanes. He was the head of the Valario family. He stood there as if the entire crumbling sidewalk was his personal stage, and the city was waiting for its cue. Silas was not here for a waitress. He was here because the cypress and grits was a single, rotting tooth in a much larger, diseased jaw. He was hunting a ghost agency, a parasitic entity called the Metropolitan Commerce Bureau. The MCB was a front, a sophisticated protection racket that bled small businesses dry. And Silas knew the money was flowing upward, into the pockets of his rivals. This diner was a link in that chain. June just wanted to get home. She tried to step around the black car. "Not so fast, sweetheart." 2 men blocked her path. They were built like broken refrigerators, smelling of stale beer and the damp wool of their coats. These were not strangers. They worked for her landlord. "Mr. Fallow wants his money." The first one grunted. "And he heard you're getting evicted. Rent just went up, effective immediately." I get paid on Friday," June stammered, clutching her bag. I did." "We'll take it in installments," the second one sneered, stepping closer. "Starting now." "That will be unnecessary." Silas Valario had not moved, but his voice cut through the rain. It was quiet, textured, like aged whiskey. The 2 men tensed. They recognized the car, if not the man. "This ain't your business, friend." Silas pushed off the hood. He walked toward them, not quickly, but with a momentum that made the rain itself seem to get out of his way. He stopped a foot from the larger man, close enough for June to see the sharp cut of his jaw, the deep intensity of his dark eyes. He was using style, not violence. "You are harassing a resident," Silas stated. He held up a small, slim cell phone. "And you are doing so on camera." He then produced a single, crisp folded paper from his inner jacket pocket. "This is an admission of tenant harassment prepared by my attorney. You will sign it, acknowledging your actions, and you will leave." The men looked at each other, their bluster deflating. This was not a street fight. This was something else. We ain't signing nothing. Silas smiled. It was not a kind smile. Then you will be arrested, and Mr. Fallow's various building code violations will become a matter of immediate public record. The choice is yours. The first man snatched the paper and a pen Silas offered. He signed it quickly, his hand shaking. The second man followed. They shoved the paper back at Silas and disappeared into the night. Across the street, parked in a no-standing zone, another car sat. June saw the vague outline of men inside. They were watching. Bram Kincaid, the public face of the MCB, tapped his fingers on his steering wheel. His men noted the sedan's license plate, flashed their fake commercial inspection badges at a passing beat cop, and stayed put. They were logging the players. June was trembling, soaked to the bone, staring at the stranger who had just saved her from Tuesday. Silas turned his attention to her. His gaze was analytical, not sympathetic. They will not bother you again. He opened the passenger door of the sedan. Get in. I will take you home. I don't know you. My name is Silas Valario. He said it like it should mean something. You are June Arquette. You have a son named Rowan. You were just framed for theft. June's blood went cold. How do you... I am offering you a ride. Miss Arquette, it is raining. He motioned to the car. You do not owe me anything, but you have just stepped onto my battlefront. She looked at the warm, dry interior of the car. She thought of the bus, the long walk. She got in. The door closed with a heavy, expensive sound, sealing out the world. The car smelled of old leather and something clean, like mint. Silas slid into the driver's seat. He did not start the car immediately. He picked up his phone and made a call. Marin, he said, it's done. Freeze the diner's accounts, all of them. Henderson just fired their only competent employee. He is exposed. I want the money trail, and I want it before sunrise. He hung up, the name Marin Duplessis hanging in the air, his strategist. Silas put the car in gear. The sedan slid into traffic like a shark joining a school of fish. They drove past Frenchman Street, the sound of a lone trumpet cutting through the night, a high, mournful cry that sounded like a warning. June stared out the window, her reflection a pale ghost against the wet city. Silas checked the rearview mirror. His eyes narrowed, just slightly. A black SUV, windows tinted to oblivion, had pulled out from the curb 2 blocks back. It kept a respectful distance. He did not speed up. He did not acknowledge the tail. He simply made a smooth, deliberate turn onto a side street, away from June's neighborhood. Where are we going? June asked, her voice tight. This isn't the way. We are making a small detour, Silas said, his voice calm, to a place called St. Orpheus. It is my establishment. You will be safer there for now. The back entrance of St. Orpheus opened not into a glamorous club, but into the heat and heart of a high-end kitchen. The air was thick and warm, smelling sharply of smoked sausage, thyme, and the holy trinity of celery, peppers, and onions simmering in a massive pot. A wave of rich jambalaya steam washed over June, the first real warmth that had touched her skin in hours. Silas guided her in with a hand hovering at her back. Never making contact, he kept his distance, a gesture of respect that felt foreign. A woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, wearing a practical black dress, approached them. Her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Silas, this is her... This is June Arquette, Silas said. Darla, find her some dry clothes from the staff lockers, and coffee, the good stuff. Darla Greaves, the club manager, nodded once. She looked at June, her expression softening from professional to something approaching empathy. Come with me, honey. Let's get you out of those wet things. Silas did not follow. He turned, his attention already shifting to the men who guarded the hallway, and June was left in Darla's capable hands. In a small, clean staff bathroom, June peeled off her soaked uniform. Darla handed her a simple black knit shirt and dark trousers. An employee's spare set. They were soft, dry. As June dressed, Darla set a steaming mug of dark roast on the sink counter. "He's not what they say he is," Darla said quietly, breaking the silence. "He's just precise." June said nothing, just wrapped her cold hands around the mug. She was led to a small office off the main kitchen. Darla left her there with a bowl of the jambalaya. June ate, the food reigniting a fire in her belly. She sat on a stool, her mind finally catching up. She was not just a fired waitress, she was a witness, or a pawn, in something vast and dangerous. Her mind worked the way it always did. It went to the numbers. June had a different kind of brain. When people saw words, she saw equations. When she looked at a grocery aisle, she was calculating cost per ounce against her dwindling paycheck. It was how she had survived, how she stretched $40 to last a week, how she navigated the labyrinth of late fees and interest rates. It was a skill born of desperation. Looking at the ledger at Cypress and Grits, she had known Henderson was faking the numbers. The rhythm was wrong. The losses did not match the customer flow. Silas returned, closing the office door softly. He did not sit, but leaned against a metal shelving unit, giving her space. "The men who followed us work for the Gulf Meridian crew," he said directly. "My competition. They have formed an alliance with Bram Kincaid and his fake agency, the MCB." June looked up from her bowl. It is not about restaurants," Silas continued. "It is about the docks, the ports, logistics. Gulf Meridian wants to control what comes in and out of this city. The MCB is their legal camouflage. They use it to squeeze legitimate businesses, break labor laws, and install their own people. The Cypress and Grits is just one small node. They needed Henderson in, so they needed you out. You were a loose end." The casual cruelty of it, the simple business logic, made her stomach tighten. "Because I saw the books." "Because you were too smart to not see the books," he corrected, and Henderson knew it. A sudden, sharp spike of fear lanced through her. "Rowan, I need to call my neighbor. I need to check on my son." Silas handed her his phone. "Of course." Her fingers trembled as she dialed Miss Loretta's number. The phone rang twice. "June, baby, I was wondering when you'd call. We're just fine." "He's okay. Is he asleep?" "Not yet. He's drawing. He says it's a steamboat for his mama." June closed her eyes, relief so profound it nearly buckled her knees. "Tell him I love him. Tell him I'm working late. Just a mix-up at the restaurant. I'll be home as soon as I can. Don't let him wait up." "You take your time. We're perfectly safe. You hear me?" "I hear you." She hung up and handed the phone back to Silas. Her hand was steady now. The door opened, and a man in a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up, stepped in. He was the club's trumpet player. June had seen him on a poster by the door. He nodded at Silas and handed him a plain manila envelope. "From the docks," the musician said. Silas opened it and pulled out a stack of shipping receipts and freight invoices. He spread them on the small desk. June, still on her stool, could see them from where she sat. Silas studied them, his brow furrowed. June just glanced, and then she froze. It was not the words, it was the numbers. A long string of digits in the corner of a bill of lading. It was dated from the week before, the same day Henderson had first accused her of the till being short $25. "That's wrong," June said, her voice quiet. Silas looked at her. "That number," she pointed, "it's not an invoice number. It's a routing code. A warehouse transfer. The first 4 digits look like a date, but they're not. They're a location key. And the rest, it's a sequence. It's designed to look like a typo." Silas stopped. He looked from the paper to her face. He saw her, truly saw her, for the first time. She was not a victim. She was a weapon. "You see that," he said, less a question than a statement. "I see numbers," June said simply. "They fall into patterns. That's a pattern." Silas gathered the papers slowly. He had come to the diner to investigate a problem. He had found an answer. "Give me a few days," he said, his voice low and serious. "Stay here, where I can keep you safe. I will unravel the plot that made you the victim." June hesitated. The stories about the Villario family were whispered in every bar, on every corner. They were the shadows that kept other, worse shadows away, but they were shadows nonetheless. She looked at this man, an organized crime boss, who had not laid a hand on her, who had offered her coffee and safety, who had just offered her justice. For the first time in years, she felt something other than tired. She felt respected. She felt seen. The rain outside had stopped. The kitchen noise faded. Through a small, high window, June could feel the change in the air, the salty, metallic tang of the wind after a storm. Silas seemed to sense her shift. "Come with me." He led her through the kitchen, up a narrow, private staircase, and onto the roof. The city was a glittering, wet jewel below them, but up here, there was a large greenhouse. He opened the door. The air inside was warm and earthy. He was growing herbs, rows and rows of basil, thyme, and mint. The scent was clean, calming, and it settled the remaining tremor in her hands. "They help me think, he said, touching a leaf of rosemary. They stood by the glass, looking out. The lights of the Crescent City Connection Bridge spanned the dark river like two lines drawn in the sky. June stared at them, two paths gleaming in the night, one legal, one not. She was standing squarely between them. "I will help you," June said, her voice finding a strength she did not know it possessed. "I will look at your numbers, but I have one condition." Silas turned to her, his face half in shadow, half in the glow of the bridge. "Name it." "My son, Rowan." Her eyes locked onto his, fierce and unbreakable. "He's not part of this. He's never to be touched. He's never to be used. Whatever happens, he stays safe." Silas held her gaze. There was no hesitation. "You have my word," he said. "No one will ever touch your son." The call came just after 7 a.m. Mr. Henderson was dead. He had been found in the upstairs storage room of the Cypress and Grits, a humid space that always smelled of rancid cooking oil and neglect. The New Orleans Police Department had barely finished stretching yellow tape across the door when the narrative was hijacked. The Metropolitan Commerce Bureau was already on site. Bram Kincaid himself, looking sharp and official, was directing the NOPD detective to the employee time logs. "June Arquette," Kincaid announced, his voice carrying for the benefit of the officers. "She was fired for theft yesterday at 6 p.m. But look here, her security fob accessed this storage room at 9:45 p.m. She came back. Must have been a confrontation. It is a tragic, open and shut case of revenge." It was a clean, simple, and complete lie. The detective, a tired veteran named Thibodeau, was about to issue a warrant for her arrest when the black sedan slid to the curb. Silas Villario emerged, followed by a man in a sharkskin suit so perfectly tailored it looked like armor. He carried an expensive leather briefcase. "Detective Thibodeau," Silas said, his voice cutting through the morning humidity. "This is Kendricks Vale, my attorney." Vale stepped forward. "All business. Before you proceed, Detective, you should know that Miss Arquette was not here at 9:45 p.m. She was, in fact, in the back of a Royal cab, license 504A, driven by a Mr. Dubois. We have the cab company's GPS data, time-stamped, showing her route from her firing directly to St. Orpheus and Mr. Dubois' sworn statement. Vale slid a tablet onto the hood of the police cruiser. The GPS track was a definitive, glowing green line. It was irrefutable. Thibodeau's eyes narrowed. He looked at Kincaid, whose face had gone rigid. The MCB acted with federal authority, but this was NOPD's homicide. "We appreciate the MCB's assistance," Thibodeau said, his voice flat, reclaiming his crime scene. "But NOPD will take the lead on the homicide investigation. You can stand down." Kincaid's jaw tightened. "That is fine, Detective. Homicide is your jurisdiction, but the theft and commercial fraud that precipitated this event fall under the MCB's mandate. We are conducting a parallel investigation." He turned, his eyes locking on Silas. We still require Miss Arquette for commercial questioning. He was trying to snatch her back, to pull her into his jurisdiction where GPS data did not matter. That will also be impossible. Kendrick's Vale interjected, his voice smooth as silk. He produced another folded document. This is a temporary restraining order, filed at 6:01 this morning in civil court. It prohibits Mr. Kincaid and any agent of the Metropolitan Commerce Bureau from approaching, contacting, or harassing Miss Arquette, pending a hearing. Silas had anticipated Kincaid's move before Kincaid even knew he would make it. Blocked. Kincaid stared at Silas with cold, murderous fury before turning sharply and leaving the scene. June was in the kitchen of St. Orpheus when Darla told her. "Henderson is dead," she said, her voice low. "They killed him," June whispered, the coffee cup trembling in her hand. "They work fast," Darla said grimly. She slid a small, nondescript USB drive across the table. "Silas wanted you to see this. It is from the diner's storage room camera. The MCB confiscated the main hard drive, but they missed the encrypted cloud backup." June plugged the drive into a laptop. The timestamp read 9:43 p.m. The door opened. A man in a baseball cap entered, his face obscured by the brim. He moved directly to the desk where Henderson kept his private books. He did not look for money. He found the ledger, tucked it into his jacket, and left. "I do not recognize him," June said. "Watch again," Silas said. He had entered the room behind her. "Watch how he walks." June replayed the short clip. The man moved with purpose, but there was a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation in his left step, a faint roll of the ankle, corrected instantly, a gait she would never have noticed. "I know that walk," Silas said. His voice was flat, hollowed out. "I have known it since I was 7 years old. That is Theo Rashid." June looked up at him. The name. "You said he runs the Port Authority." "He was my childhood friend," Silas stated. The betrayal was absolute, leaving no room for doubt. June's mind went straight back to the numbers. Henderson, Theo, the MCB, the fake losses. "The invoices," she said, thinking aloud. "The ones you showed me last night. The dates match." Silas turned to her, his focus sharpening. "The dates Henderson faked the cash losses," she explained, her mind racing. "They align perfectly with the shipping invoices. I need to see the official port logs, I think. Every time Henderson reported a loss, a specific container ship was changing its berth. The discrepancy was always 17 minutes. Silas stared at her, the pieces clicking into place. 17 minutes. That is the window. That is how long it takes to move a container from an international carrier to a domestic truck without logging it, if you control the manifests. Theo controls the manifests, June finished. And the MCB provides the legal cover, Silas concluded. They are using the fake agency to squeeze businesses and control the toll points. They move contraband during that 17-minute gap, and the diner's fake losses were the electronic payments to the port inspectors. It was a perfect closed loop. The thought was shattered by a sudden, violent sound from the street, not the mournful jazz, but the sharp crack, crack, crack of gunfire. They both moved to the reinforced window. A dark sedan was speeding past the front entrance of St. Orpheus. 3 bullet holes had punched into the heavy oak doors. A message. Silas watched the car disappear. He did not yell for his men to return fire. The street was still busy with morning commuters. Civilians. "Get the plate," he said, his voice deadly calm. Into the phone he held. "Find the driver. I want his name and his habits." He hung up. June looked at him. "You are not?" "They want a war. I want to win," Silas said. "Firing into a civilian street is sloppy. It is weakness. That is the Gulf Meridian crew." June saw his code then. It was not about peace. It was about absolute control. Violence was a final, surgical tool, not a tantrum. His dark, precise honor was the only law. His phone chimed. It was not a call. It was a text message from an unknown number. Silas opened it. His entire body went rigid. The air in the room seemed to flash freeze. He did not speak. He just turned the screen toward June. It was a photograph of Rowan. He was walking out of Miss Loretta's apartment building, his cartoon backpack dwarfing him, heading to the small neighborhood school. He was laughing at something off camera. The photo was clear, taken from across the street. The message below it was simple: stay out of the water. June's breath hitched. The floor vanished. This was not about her, not about ledgers. This was her son. Silas looked at her, his face a mask of cold granite. The calculated businessman was gone. He had honored the rules. They had just broken the only one that mattered. They crossed the line, June whispered, a cold terror rising in her throat. Yes, Silas said. His voice was quiet, but it was the quiet of a pressure valve screaming. From this moment, I am standing in front of every arrow aimed your way. He made 2 calls. The first, I want Miss Loretta and Rowan brought here. Now, use the bakery van. No sirens, no mistakes. The second was to Darla. Move them into the rooftop residence. Full lockdown. I want the Orion team on the perimeter, the roof, and the lobby. Active detail. He turned to June, his dark eyes holding hers. You are not staying in a guest suite. You and your son will stay in the penthouse. He led her to a private elevator. This apartment is separate from the club, secured. He showed her a small, biometric panel by the door. There is another by the bed. It is a direct alarm to my internal security, the Orion team. If you even think you are in danger, you press it. June nodded, numb. She had agreed to look at numbers. Now, she and her son were targets, locked in a fortress, and their only protection was the man who had pulled them into the war. The numbers were not just a sequence, they were a map. June sat at the massive oak desk in the rooftop apartment, the city lights far below. The shipping invoices spread out under a single desk lamp. The string of digits she had seen, the one that looked like a typo, was not a routing key. It was a location. It is not a code, she explained, her fingers tracing the numbers. It is coordinates, latitude and longitude, hidden inside the freight charges. It points to a bonded warehouse, deep in the bywater, right against the canal. Silas stood at the window, his back to her. A blind spot, not officially part of the port, but close enough to the water to be useful. He turned. Kincaid and Theo are not just moving contraband, they are staging it. But we still do not know what it is. We need the next drop, Darla said, stepping into the room. The intermediary. He's scheduled for tomorrow. The drop was not in a smoky back room. It was at the 11 Matter service at St. Augustine's. The next morning, the 3 of them sat in a wooden pew, surrounded by the faithful. June wore a simple dress Darla had provided. Silas and Darla looked like any other respectable couple paying their dues. The air was thick with incense and the sound of a powerful gospel choir. It was the last place anyone would look for them. The intermediary was a small, elderly woman in a floral hat. As the congregation rose to sing the final hymn, she discreetly swapped her hymnal with the one left in the pew in front of her. Darla, in the next row, simply leaned forward as if to read the music, picked up the new book, and slipped it into her purse. A clean, silent exchange. They exited with the crowd, melting into the street, the sun bright and hot. They were 3 blocks away when Darla spoke, her voice low. Dark blue sedan, 2 men. They have been with us since the church. They were tailed. This way, Silas commanded. He did not run. He turned a sharp corner, leading them away from the open streets and into the dense, chaotic artery of the riverside night market. The change was immediate. The scent of incense was replaced by the smell of raw fish, boiled crawfish, and diesel fumes. Music blared from competing stalls. Silas moved through the crowd like a knife, Darla at his back. "Split them," Silas ordered. Darla veered left toward the food stalls. Silas grabbed June's hand, a firm, impersonal grip, and pulled her right, toward the river. The 2 men from the sedan pushed through the crowd behind them, less subtle, knocking people aside. They were closing the gap, A dead end loomed, a piling of oyster sacks by the water. "Silas," June said, her voice tight with panic. One of the men lunged, grabbing for her arm. June reacted on pure instinct. She grabbed the handle of a metal seafood cart loaded with ice and shrimp, pivoting and shoving it hard into the man's path. He collided with it, a shower of ice and shellfish spraying across the pavement. He went down, cursing, tangled in a net. The second man raised something dark. Silas did not wait. He shoved June behind him, turned, and pulled them through a narrow gap between two buildings, an alley June had not even seen. The ground was a carpet of crushed, sharp oyster shells that crunched loudly under their feet. They burst out onto a small, rickety wooden pier. The river, wide and brown, stretched out before them. They were exposed. "There." Silas pointed to a flat-bottomed boat tied at the end. That was when June heard the sound, a high-pitched whine, like an angry insect passing her ear. Silas did not hesitate. He grabbed her, his arm locking around her waist, and used his body's momentum to tackle her, pulling her down behind a stack of old metal traps. Time stopped. A fraction of a second later, a crack echoed from across the water. A splinter of wood exploded from the railing, exactly where June's head had been. A sniper. June was pinned beneath Silas, her cheek pressed against the rough cotton of his coat. Her heart was a hummingbird in her chest. She could not breathe. All she could smell was him. Not cologne, but the sharp, clean, undeniable scent of mint from the greenhouse, mixed with the faint tang of river water. It filled her lungs, cutting through the fear, grounding her. It was the first time they had truly touched. His weight was heavy, solid, and utterly protective. A strange, unfamiliar heat flooded her, a jolt of adrenaline that had nothing to do with the bullet. "Now," he whispered. He was on his feet in one fluid motion, pulling her up with him. "Do not look, just run." They sprinted the last 20 feet. Another shot cracked, hitting the water. Silas threw himself into the airboat, his hand reaching for her. "Jump!" She jumped. He caught her, pulling her in as he simultaneously untied the rope and hit the ignition. The massive fan on the back of the airboat roared to life, deafening them. Silas shoved the throttle forward, and the boat shot away from the pier, skimming across the surface of the water, heading straight into the dark labyrinth of the bayou. They raced through the swamp for miles. The engine noise, a shield, alligators, disturbed by their passing, slid from the mud banks, their eyes catching the moonlight like yellow lanterns. Finally, Silas slowed the engine, letting the boat drift in a narrow, cypress-lined passage. The sudden silence was as loud as the engine had been. June's hands were shaking so hard she could barely breathe, but in her left hand, she was still clutching the hymnal, now damp with river spray. She opened it. Tucked inside was a single, folded piece of paper. Her hands, slick with sweat, fumbled with it. Silas watched her, his face carved from shadows. She angled the paper to the moonlight. Her voice was a dry rasp. "Warehouse 47B, door 3, midnight." She looked at him, her eyes wide. "The cargo is listed as industrial pharmaceuticals." They both knew what that meant, not medicine. They met Darla back at St. Orpheus 2 hours later, entering through the same kitchen door. "We moved tonight," Silas said, his voice hard. "Just us, the Orion team. The police are compromised. The MCB is a ghost. We cannot trust anyone." He looked at June, the intensity of his gaze making it hard for her to hold. "Darla," he said, "take Rowan. Take him now. Not to Miss Loretta's. Take him to Father Marcel. The church is neutral ground. The Gulf Meridian crew will not touch a priest, not even for Theo." June's stomach dropped. Separating her from Rowan, it was the one thing she feared. "He will be safer there, June," Silas said, reading her face. "They are targeting you, which means they are targeting him. I cannot protect you both if you are in the same place." He was right. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. As Darla left to prepare Rowan, June stood in the center of the kitchen, the smell of mint still clinging to her clothes. She looked at the schematic of the warehouse Silas was already sketching on a napkin. She was not the woman who had been fired from the diner. She was not just the person being protected. She was the one who had read the map. She was the one who held the key in the darkness of the bayou. June finally understood. She was not a victim in his war. She was a soldier. The storm hit at 9 p.m. The sky over New Orleans, which had been a bruised purple, tore open. A sheet of rain, thick as a curtain, hammered the city. Then the power grid failed. The lights in the St. Orpheus penthouse, the street lamps, the entire neighborhood, all extinguished, plunging them into a sudden, profound darkness. The only illumination came from the violent flashes of lightning, briefly illuminating the rooftop greenhouse where they had taken refuge. The sound was deafening rain drumming on the glass roof, thunder rattling the panes. They were stranded, isolated. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, sharp basil, and the clean, bracing scent of the mint Silas cultivated. June stood by the glass, watching the water cascade down. Silas was a shadow near the door, his stillness a counterpoint to the chaos outside. "He was my way out," Silas said. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the noise of the storm. June turned, hugging herself against the sudden chill. "Who?" "Theo." He did not need to elaborate. "I never wanted this. The family, the reputation. I was going to walk away from it all. More than 10 years ago, go clean. My father's organization. It was a relic. I wanted something legitimate." He moved from the door, his silhouette drifting between the rows of herbs. "Theo came to me when he was already working at the Port Authority. He had the plan, a legitimate, high-volume logistics enterprise. He said we could use the Valario name and infrastructure to build something real, something that actually served the city. He said we could clean the money and the reputation at the same time." Lightning flashed, catching the bitter irony on his face. "He did not just pull me back into the life, June. He was my hope for legitimacy. He was the anchor. And all of it, every contract, every handshake, it was a lie. He built a back door for the Gulf Meridian crew, using my name." He stopped, clenching his fists. June saw the stark white lines of an old scar across his wrist, a pale mark against his skin in the dim light, a relic of the life he claimed to despise. She moved before she thought. The blanket she had draped over her shoulders fell away. She stepped toward him, closing the small distance between them. Her fingers, warm and trembling slightly, reached out. She did not touch his face. She touched the scar. Her fingertips traced the raised, damaged skin. It was an act of quiet understanding, a bridge across the darkness. Silas went absolutely still. His breath caught. His gaze dropped from the storm to her hand on his wrist. The air between them crackled, a different kind of electricity. He did not pull away. Instead, he slowly covered her hand with his own, turning his wrist until their palms met. "Let me hold you," he whispered. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual command. It was not an order, it was a plea. "Only if you want." June did not need words. She gave her answer by leaning into his space, rising slightly on her toes, closing the final inch. He met her. The kiss was slow, almost tentative at first, a discovery in the dark. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of a chase, but something deeper. It tasted of the mint from his skin and the ozone from the storm. His lips were firm, searching. A quiet sigh escaped her as she responded, and the kiss deepened. His hand left hers, sliding to her waist, pulling her flush against the hard lines of his body. His other hand moved to the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her steady. June's hand slid up the front of his shirt, gripping his shoulders. The warm, humid glass of the greenhouse pressed against her back. His breath was heavy against her cheek, their heartbeats a frantic rhythm against the drumming rain. He broke the kiss, only to rest his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "June," he rasped, as if the name itself was a physical effort. Then, with an elegant, surprising strength. He slid one arm beneath her knees and lifted her. She gasped, her arms wrapping instinctively around his neck as he carried her. He moved past the rows of basil, the leaves brushing against her arm, to a long, cushioned lounge chair tucked in the driest corner of the greenhouse. He laid her down gently, his jacket, still damp, slid from his shoulders as he leaned over her. She saw the raw desire in his eyes, but she also saw the iron control that held it in check. His hand moved, tracing the line of her collarbone, his fingertips electric on her skin. Skin on skin. The touch was a slow-building fire. June's breath hitched, and she bit her lower lip, a nervous, involuntary reflex against the intensity of the moment. Silas saw it. He stopped. The predator in him receded, replaced by the man. He pulled back, just half a beat, giving her room to breathe, room to refuse. A slow, devastating smile touched the corners of his mouth. "We have the whole night," he said, his voice a low rumble. He leaned in again, but this time, he kissed the pulse point on her throat, just below her ear. A shiver racked her body. They resumed, whispering forgotten dreams and future hopes into the darkness, trading kisses that deepened, pulling them under. They were finding a new, vital safety, not in steel doors or bodyguards, but in the center of the storm, anchored only to each other. The world outside faded, leaving them entwined in the shadows, lost to the rain. The dawn was sharp and clean. The storm had washed the city, and the power had returned. June woke first, tangled in the blanket on the lounge. Silas was in a nearby chair, his head leaned back, asleep but still watchful. She rose quietly, padding into the silent penthouse. His shirt from the night before was draped over a chair. She pulled it on. It was too large, smelling of him, a strange armor. She was in the kitchen, the rich, dark scent of chicory coffee filling the air. When he appeared in the doorway, he was in his shirt sleeves, his expression unreadable. He just watched her. His gaze was warmer than the coffee, a silent promise that settled deep in her bones. He took the mug she offered, their fingers brushing. "Last night," he began. "Last night happened," June interrupted, her voice steady. "It was real. But it does not change today. It does not change what we have to do." A flicker of profound respect lit his eyes. He nodded. "Warehouse 47B, tonight. The plan stands." "Tonight," she affirmed. The moment of quiet intimacy was broken by a soft knock. Darla entered, her face set in its usual professional mask. She did not comment on June's attire, though her eyes missed nothing. She placed 2 heavy, cream-colored envelopes on the granite counter. "The opposition just provided us with an opportunity," Darla said. 2 invitations to the Gala Rivergate. It is a massive charity fundraiser on the Arcadia steamboat tomorrow night. Silas picked one up, testing its weight. "And Bram Kincaid and the MCB are the guests of honor," Darla said. "They are announcing their new Clean Ports initiative." The bitter irony hung in the air. "They will all be there," June said, her mind already moving, calculating. Kincaid, Theo, all their powerful friends trapped on a boat. "We hit the warehouse first," Silas said, his voice firm. "We need the proof before we strike the party. But this is where we will end it." June nodded. As Silas and Darla began to discuss logistics, June's hand went to her throat. She touched the thin, gold chain she always wore. It had been her mother's. She closed her fist around the small, worn locket, feeling the metal warm against her palm. It was a talisman, a reminder of the life she was fighting for, and a charm for the war that was to come. The steel door of Warehouse 47B groaned in protest as one of Silas's Orion team members breached the lock. The air that hit them was not damp or salty. It was chemical and sterile. Inside, the vast space was stacked floor to ceiling with wooden crates. Silas used a crowbar to pry one open. It was not guns, not drugs for human consumption. The crates were filled with thousands of vials labeled in Spanish, Bovino Health, Premium Veterinary Antibiotic. "It is a ghost product," Darla said, shining a flashlight on the label. "It does not exist. They are shipping saline and calling it medicine, then billing shell companies in South America for millions. It is clean, simple money laundering." June was not looking at the crates. She was at the small shipping office, her fingers flying across a laptop she had jacked into their port. "Silas, we have a problem. There is a hidden camera. It is not part of the warehouse security." "Where?" "Here." She pointed to a small, dark lens high in the rafters, indistinguishable from a bolt head. "It is active. It is feeding a live signal." "To where?" Silas's voice was hard. June's blood ran cold. She traced the IP. "It is routed to a secure server. The server is labeled MCB Operations." "They knew we were coming," Silas said, motioning for his team to pull back. "No," June said, her voice shaking. "Worse, look at this." She pointed to the encrypted access log on the camera's feed, a digital signature. "This is the access key that activated the camera 10 minutes ago. I recognize the algorithm from your private server logs at St. Orpheus." "What are you saying?" "The person who turned this camera on?" "Silas, the signature. It is Marin Duplessis." The name hung in the chemical air, more toxic than anything in the crates. Marin, his strategist, his left hand, the man who had frozen the diner's accounts, the man who knew every move Silas was making. Before Silas could even process the betrayal, Darla's earpiece crackled. "3 SUVs, high speed, blocking the access road. They are here." "Out now," Silas commanded, his face an unreadable mask. They burst from the warehouse into the humid night air of the parking lot. It was too late. 3 black SUVs, their high beams blinding, had formed a perfect, silent semicircle, trapping them. Car doors opened. Men from the Gulf Meridian crew fanned out, armed, but they did not raise their weapons. They were a wall. And from the center vehicle, Theo Rashid stepped into the light. He was calm, dressed in an expensive suit, looking as if he were attending a board meeting, not an ambush. "You should not have come here, Silas," Theo said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet. "This is a system. It is bigger than you." "Marin," Silas said, the name tasting like ash. "He works for you." "Marin works for the future," Theo corrected him, stepping forward. "The one thing you never understood, you cannot fight the system, Silas. You have to join it. You trust people. That is your mistake. People fail. People are greedy. And you are not." "I am pragmatic," Theo said. "The Valario name is old news. The MCB, that is a federal shield. Kincaid offers protection we could never buy. Marin and I, we just sold the one asset you were wasting your port data. We sold our access for a seat at the table." The depth of the betrayal hit Silas. A physical blow. It was not just his childhood friend, it was his strategist. His entire inner circle was a lie. "So you kill me and the woman?" Theo asked. "No. We are not animals," Theo said, almost sadly. "We're just going to contain you. You will be arrested for illegal trespassing and industrial espionage. The MCB is already on its way." Silas looked at June. He looked at Darla. He would never survive MCB custody. Neither would she. "Darla," Silas said, a single command word. Darla raised her left hand. It held a small, black device. She pressed the button. A high-frequency pulse erupted, shutting down the electronics and lights of all 3 enemy SUVs. Simultaneously, a small diversionary charge planted by the Orion team exploded at the far end of the lot. In the split second of confusion, Silas grabbed June's hand. "To our car!" Their own reinforced SUV was parked behind the warehouse. Darla was already in the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life. Silas and June piled in the middle, his 2 Orion men in the back. They tore out of the lot, smashing through a chain-link gate. The chase was on. They hit the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway at over 100 miles an hour, the 24-mile stretch of concrete over dark water. There was nowhere to turn, nowhere to hide. 2 of Theo's SUVs were right behind them. They were fast, gaining. "They are trying to box us in," Darla said, her eyes locked on the mirrors. A window shattered. The Gulf Meridian men were firing. One of Silas's men in the back returned fire, aiming low, at the tires. Silas was in the passenger seat, reloading a clip for his man. "June, get down," he yelled. But June was not looking back. She was looking forward. "Darla, they are not trying to box us in. They are pushing us into the crosswind." The wind was howling across the lake, a powerful, invisible force. The SUV behind them accelerated, ramming their rear bumper. The vehicle fishtailed violently. "Hold on," Darla shouted, fighting the wheel. Another shot. This one hit the front. The windshield spiderwebbed. "Silas," June said, her voice perfectly calm. "Reload." He looked at her, confused. He slammed the fresh magazine into the handgun and passed it back. "Keep them busy," June said. "What are you doing?" Silas demanded. "Driving." In one fluid motion, June unbuckled, grabbed the wheel from Darla's hands, and shoved her. "Get in the back, jam their comms." Darla did not argue. She scrambled over the console. June slid into the driver's seat, her hands gripping the wheel just as the enemy SUV rammed them again. She let the car swerve, almost accepting the impact, then slammed the accelerator. Silas watched the civilian car, blue sedan, 200 yards. He saw her intent. He grabbed the dash. "June, no." "Yes." She swerved hard right, directly into the path of the ramming SUV. The driver, expecting her to fight the wind, was forced to correct. June braked, letting him pass her. Now he was in front of her, and the civilian sedan was just ahead of him. The Gulf Meridian driver saw his choice: hit the civilians or swerve. He swerved hard. He hit the concrete barrier. The wind caught him. The SUV slid, sparks flying, across 2 lanes of traffic and came to rest in the wet grass of the center median. A wreck, but no casualties. The second SUV, seeing its partner disabled, fell back. "Darla, now!" June yelled. Darla hit the jammer, the SUV behind them, suddenly losing GPS and communications, slowed in confusion. June saw her exit, a construction lane, blocked by orange barrels. She did not slow down. She plowed through them, sending plastic flying, and took the unfinished exit ramp into the darkness of the city's underbelly. They were clear. They abandoned the car 2 miles later and made it back to St. Orpheus on foot. In the safety of the penthouse, the adrenaline drained away. It left a vacuum. Silas, for the first time since she had met him, looked exhausted. He did not just look tired, he looked defeated. The double betrayal had cut him deeper than any bullet could. He sank into a chair by the window, his head in his hands. June watched him. The man who had been a monolith of control was breaking. She walked over to him. She did not offer words of comfort. She did not analyze the situation. She simply stood behind his chair and placed her hand on the back of his neck. Her skin was warm against his. She felt the powerful pulse beating there, the life in him, the tension in his muscles. She just held him, her presence a silent, steady anchor. His breathing, ragged at first, began to slow. He did not move, but he leaned back, just slightly, into her touch. The pulse beneath her fingers and the pulse in her own wrist seemed to merge, finding one, steady rhythm. "They own the shadows," Silas finally said, his voice muffled. "Marin, Theo, they own my whole network." "We cannot win there," June said, her voice quiet but firm. "Not in the warehouses, not in the alleys." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers in the reflection of the glass. "They are throwing a party," June said. "They are announcing their victory to the whole city, right on that boat." He understood. The fatigue in his eyes burned away, replaced by a cold, new fire. "You cannot win a war if you are the only one who knows you are fighting," Silas said. "Then," June replied, her hand still steady on his neck, "we have to tell everyone." The counterattack began not with a bullet, but with a press conference. At dawn, a fleet of white vans from the New Orleans Urban Revitalization Commission, a committee no one had ever heard of, descended upon St. Orpheus. They were flanked by Bram Kincaid and a dozen men wearing MCB windbreakers, all of them carrying cameras. They did not raid the club, they inspected it, citing dozens of manufactured code violations. By 10 a.m., the first headlines hit the online editions of the local papers. The narrative was poisonous. Local mafia boss linked to port corruption holds whistleblower hostage. They painted June as a terrified, coerced employee, a single mother trapped by a crime lord. They painted Silas as the monster they needed him to be. But the master stroke arrived at 11, delivered by a certified courier. It was an official-looking document bearing a crest of a pelican guarding a child. The Family Risk Division. It read, "Another ghost, born from the same MCB letterhead." The document was a formal notice of an impending investigation into the welfare of Rowan Arquette. It demanded an immediate assessment of his living situation, citing his mother's unstable employment and her association with known criminal elements. They were threatening to take her son. Silas, who had been calmly coordinating with Kendricksvale, went silent. He looked at the paper, and June saw a cold, primitive rage surface in his eyes, something far more terrifying than his controlled anger. June, however, did not cry. She did not panic. She picked up the letter, read it twice, and set it down. A calm, chilling fury settled over her. "No," she said, her voice quiet. "I will move you," Silas said instantly. "Tonight, out of the state, I have a place in Carolina." "No," June said again, stronger. "That is what they want. They want me to run. If I run, I am guilty. If I am guilty, they are justified. If they are justified, they win. I am not running." Kendricksvale, who had been watching the exchange, stepped forward. "She is right. Silas, running is an admission. We are out of shadows. The only move we have left is the light." He tapped the cream-colored invitation to the Rivergate Gala. "This is our courtroom. The mayor will be there. Every major news outlet in the state will be there. They have given us the stage and the audience." "It is a trap," Silas countered. "They will be expecting us." "Good," June said, turning to him. "They will never expect how we show up." Kendricksvale nodded, "Which brings me to our engineer." He introduced Nomi Cruz. She was a small, intense woman with restless energy, a former network engineer for a major telecom who had been fired for exposing their data throttling practices. She was, Kendricks explained, the best. "A speech is not enough," Nomi said, already unpacking a case of electronics. "People do not listen to words. They believe what they see. While they are all on that boat, watching Kincaid accept his award, they will also be watching this." She pointed out the penthouse window toward the massive arching silhouette of the Crescent City connection. "Those pillars, they are the biggest projection screen in Louisiana. I was a meteorologist before I was an engineer. I know how to use industrial-grade projectors to paint the sky. You get me the data. I will make it art." The data was June's domain. For the next 8 hours, she did not move. She took the complex ledgers, the hidden transfer codes, the 17-minute gaps, and the fake veterinary invoices, and she translated them. She wove the disparate threads of evidence into a single, undeniable visual story, a timeline. A bright red line showed the money flowing from the Clean Ports Initiative Fund directly into Gulf Meridian shell accounts, all timed perfectly to the MCB's inspections. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It was a confession. As night fell, Silas entered the study. June was rubbing her temples, the screen glow illuminating the exhaustion on her face. "You have done it," he said, looking at the finished graph. "It is undeniable." "Nomi is loading it now," June said. "It is ready." "Good. You will be safe here tonight. Nomi will trigger the broadcast remotely. I will go to the boat with Darla and Kendricks." June stood up, turning to face him. "No." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "That is not a request. June, they are hunting you. This entire gala is a pretext to arrest you, or worse, you will not be there." "If I am not there, I am the laborer hostage from the newspapers," she shot back. her voice rising. "I am the unstable mother who abandoned her post. If you show up with this data, they will say you faked it to frame them. But if the woman they tried to erase stands up and presents it herself, that is not a story. That is testimony." "I will not let you walk into a cage." His control snapped, his voice a low roar. He gripped her arms, his fingers digging in, his eyes blazing with a desperate, protective fear. "I will not let them put their hands on you." "And I will not let you fight this for me," she retorted, shoving against his chest. It was like pushing granite. "This started because I was weak, because I was a victim. It ends because I am not. If you hide me, you are no better than Kincaid. You are just a different kind of cage." The words struck him silent. His grip on her arms loosened, his hands sliding to her shoulders, his thumbs stroking the skin there. The anger in his eyes faded, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability. He was terrified, not of the fight, but of losing her. He pulled her into him, his arms wrapping around her waist, burying his face in her hair. She felt the tremor run through his body. "You are not a liability," he whispered against her skin. "You are the only thing that is real in all of this. The thought of them, "I know," she murmured, her arms sliding around his neck, holding him tightly. "I am scared too. But we have to stand in the same direction. Silas, we have to do this together, or not at all." He leaned back, his forehead resting against hers. He let out a long, slow breath. "Together." Darla entered, her timing, as always, perfect. "The car is ready, and I just spoke to Father Marcel. Rowan is asleep. He thinks he is on a camping trip with the church choir. My best 2 Orion men are disguised as seminary students. They are in the next room. He is secure." The final piece was in place. An hour later, June stood in the center of the room. She wore a simple black dress, the only formal thing she owned, salvaged from her old apartment. It was modest, practical, and, in its own way, defiant. She wore her mother's locket. Silas entered, dressed in a flawless dark tuxedo. He stopped. He did not look at her with desire. He looked at her with a kind of odd, terrible reverence. He saw the waitress from Cyprus and Grits. He saw the analyst who broke the code. He saw the woman who had faced him down. He walked to her and held out his arm. His eyes were dark, steady, and filled with an unbreakable vow. He would fight until his last breath. "It is time." Silas Valario said the Arcadia steamboat was a jewel box floating on black velvet. It churned the Mississippi, its massive red paddle wheel a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. On the main deck, crystal chandeliers dripped light. Champagne was poured from foil-wrapped bottles, and a full brass band filled the air with a joyful, sweating sound. It was the polished face of New Orleans, the dazzling, expensive mask worn to cover the grit and mud beneath. Silas Valario, his dark tuxedo tailored to perfection, entered with June Arquette on his arm. They were announced as Mr. and Mrs. Rowan, names tied to a generous donation to the Rivergate Charity Fund. June's simple black dress felt like a whisper in a room of shouts, but Silas's hand rested firmly on the small of her back, a silent, grounding pressure. They were the distraction. The real work was happening at the service entrance. Darla and Nomi, dressed in the starched black and white of the high-end catering staff, pushed a rattling trolley. Nomi, wired and sharp, moved toward the bandstand Kendrick's Vale, having arrived an hour earlier disguised as part of the mayor's AV team, was already in the small sound booth overlooking the ballroom. Nomi approached the trombone player as the band took a break. "Your slide lock is sticking. Sugar," she murmured, her hands moving with expert speed. The humidity. As she pretended to wipe it, she planted a wafer-thin transmitter deep inside the bell of the horn. "There you go." She gave the signal. In the booth, Kendrick's Vale patched the new audio source. "Nomi is hot," he whispered into his comms. "Audio feed is live." Across the river, in a rented apartment, Nomi's primary setup was ready. She had a high-intensity industrial projector aimed squarely at the massive concrete pillar of the Crescent City connection. "Link established," she confirmed. We are a go. At 9:30 p.m., the band leader tapped his stand and the music softened. Bram Kincaid, the man of the hour, walked onto the stage. He was tan, his teeth impossibly white. He radiated fraudulent sincerity. Thank you, he began, his voice booming over the speakers. We are here tonight to celebrate a new era for New Orleans, an era of transparency, an era of integrity. He paused for applause. For too long, our ports have been complicated, but the Metropolitan Commerce Bureau is here to change that. We are the inspectors who work for you, the people. June stood near the back of the ballroom, Silas a silent, imposing shadow beside her. In her hand, hidden in a small evening bag, was a simple actuator. And that is why I am so proud to announce our Clean Ports Initiative. Now, Silas whispered. June pressed the button. Nothing happened on the boat, but across the river, the projector flared to life. A woman near the window gasped, then another, a man pointed. What in God's name is that? Projected onto the bridge pillar, in letters 60 feet high, was June's graph, a sharp, undeniable timeline. The MCB inspections, the Gulf Meridian donations, the 17-minute gaps, and at the bottom, the digital signature that authorized it all. Moran Duplessis. The ballroom dissolved into chaos. Phones were thrust toward the windows. The mayor, standing beside Kincaid, took a half step away from him, his face pale. Kincaid stared, his smile frozen, turning to chalk. Shut it down, he hissed at his men. Shut that down! Theo Rashid, near the stage, grabbed a radio. Kill the ship's main power. Cut the broadcast. Now. A moment later, the Arcadia died. The chandeliers went black. The music stopped. The emergency lights, a sickly red, flickered on, casting long, demonic shadows. And as if summoned by the chaos, the peripheral edge of the storm hit. A gust of wind howled, driving a sheet of cold rain across the open decks. We move, Silas said, grabbing June's arm. Their path was blocked. Mateo, the Gulf Meridian enforcer, stepped out of the darkness, leaving the party. Valario. Get to the upper deck, Silas commanded. Shoving June toward the stairs, he turned to face Mateo on the flooring, now slick with rainwater. Mateo threw a heavy, brutal punch. Silas ducked, slipping on the wet deck. He used the momentum, dropping and sweeping Mateo's legs out from under him. The two men crashed onto the deck, a furious, silent tangle of limbs and fine wool. No guns, not with civilians screaming, being herded downstairs by the crew. It was fists and leverage, a gutter fight in a ballroom. June raced up the stairs to the promenade deck. A hand shot out and seized her arm, yanking her into a dark corridor. It was Moran Duplessis. His handsome face was a mask of sheer panic. June, wait, he pleaded, his grip bruising. We can make a deal. They will kill us both. Kincaid is insane. Just come with me. We can disappear. Two of Kincaid's MCB guards stood behind him, blocking the exit. She was trapped. Let me go, Marin, she said, her voice cold. Do not be stupid, he hissed, trying to drag her. June reached into her bag. She pulled out the small, sharp glass-etching pen she had seen in Nomi's kit. She did not aim for him. She jammed the carbide tip into the glass of the red fire alarm on the wall, shattering it. A deafening electronic klaxon blared. Separate from the power grid, red strobes flashed, blinding them. The two guards flinched, instinctively turning toward the new alarm. It was all the time June needed. She drove the heel of her shoe down onto Moran's expensive Italian loafer. He roared as the bone crunched, his grip releasing. June broke free, running past the disoriented guards and onto the deserted forward stage. The emergency microphone was live. She grabbed it. Her voice, amplified, cut through the alarm and the rain. My name is June Arquette. Across the river, Nomi, anticipating the move, rerouted the feed. June's face, pale and defiant, illuminated by the red strobe, flashed onto the bridge pillar. I was a waitress at Cypress and Grits. I am a single mother, Bram Kincaid, and the MCB framed me for theft. They murdered my manager. They threatened to take my son. They did it all to cover up the evidence you see right now. Lies, Kincaid, having left Silas to his men, charged the stage. He lunged, his face purple, and ripped the microphone from her hand. She is a known criminal. She is a... He never finished. Darla Greaves, who had been tracking him, emerged from the shadow of the stage. She moved with the silent, terrifying efficiency of the Orion team. She did not hit him. She seized his outstretched wrist, twisted, and applied a technical soft lock. Kincaid's scream was cut short as his joints, wrist, elbow, shoulder were instantly immobilized. He was forced to his knees in agonizing, bloodless submission. Every cell phone in the room turned. They were no longer filming the projection. They were filming the guest of honor, held in a perfect compliance lock by a woman in a catering uniform. The videos streamed, hitting social media. "Pushing the ledger," Nomi said, her voice grim. She hit the final command, the complete unredacted data. Every stolen dollar, every false invoice was dumped onto the public internet. The link appeared on the projection screen. High above the river, the gala's pre-scheduled fireworks display began. Brilliant bursts of green and gold exploded. A beautiful, thunderous, and utterly oblivious celebration. While the real explosion, the data bomb, lit up the city. The Arcadia was adrift. The storm, no longer peripheral, had slammed into them. The main engines were dead, and the hurricane-force winds were pushing the massive steamboat, a multi-ton toy, scraping it with a groan against the concrete embankment of the river. On the main deck, the emergency lights cast pulsing red shadows. Silas, his tuxedo jacket torn, had just sent Mateo sprawling. The Gulf Meridian enforcer scrambled backward on the rain-slicked deck. His hand finding his boot, he produced a 6-inch knife, the blade gleaming wetly. "This ends now, Velario." June, who had just seen Darla secure Kincaid on the stage, turned at the shout. Mateo was not lunging for Silas. He was lunging for her. Time seemed to stop. Silas moved faster than she thought humanly possible. He threw himself sideways, a solid, intercepting force. He did not try to block the blade. He took the blow, absorbing the force to shield her. The knife sank deep into the muscle of his left shoulder. Silas grunted, a deep, guttural sound, and with his uninjured arm drove his fist into Mateo's jaw, sending the enforcer crashing against a metal winch. "Silas!" June screamed. He staggered back against the railing, his face pale and tight, his hand instinctively going to the wound. June rushed to him, grabbing a silk gala napkin from an overturned table. "My God, you are bleeding!" She pressed the cloth against the wound, but the rain soaked it instantly, turning it dark. "It is just a scratch," he lied, his teeth gritted. "Stop moving." The voice was new. It was cold, authoritative. Theo Rashid stood at the top of the grand staircase, drenched, his suit ruined. In his hand, he held a dark, steady pistol. It was aimed directly at Silas's chest. "Theo," Silas breathed, leaning heavily against the railing. "It is over, Silas," Theo said, his eyes hollow. "This whole circus. Kincaid is done. My partnership with him is done. But the ports are mine." He stepped down onto the deck, the gun never wavering. "Give them to me. Sign over your shipping interests. Right now. You do that, and I let you and the woman live. I will even get you a doctor." Silas stared at his old friend, the betrayal cutting deeper than the knife wound. "And if I do not, then you both bleed out on the deck of this sinking ship," Theo said flatly. June let go of Silas's shoulder. She stood up, her thin dress plastered to her skin, and stepped between the two men. "Get out of the way, June," Theo warned. "No." Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the storm. "You are not a pragmatist. Theo, you are a coward." She pulled the small USB drive from her evening bag, the backup of the diner footage. "You think you are saving the city? You used to want that. Now, you are just saving your own ego." "I do not know what you are talking about." This, She held up the drive. "I know why you joined them. I saw the other footage, the clip that was not on the main server." Theo's eyes narrowed. "The Gulf Meridian crew," June said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "They did not just offer you a partnership, did they? They sent you a video of your wife, of your 2 daughters. They threatened your family. Theo, you did all this. You sold your soul because you were terrified." The silence on the deck was absolute, broken only by the howl of the wind. Theo's hand, the one holding the gun, began to tremble. His mask of control shattered. He was not a kingpin. He was a trapped man. "You were supposed to be my brother, Silas," Theo whispered, his voice breaking. "You should have protected me." "By letting you become them," Silas countered, pushing himself upright. At that moment, Bram Kincaid, having broken free from Darla in the chaos, staggered onto the deck, his face purple. "Rashid, shoot them. Shoot them both. We can still contain this." Theo looked at Kincaid's sweating, terrified face. He looked at June, who stood unarmed, offering him truth. He looked at Silas, who was bleeding for that truth. His conscience, buried for years, finally clawed its way to the surface. He lowered the gun, his shoulders slumping. "I'm done selling," he said. He turned the pistol, aiming it squarely at Kincaid. "I choose not to sell my soul today." "Traitor!" Mateo roared. He had recovered and was charging again, the knife raised, aiming for Theo's back. A 3-way melee erupted. Kincaid lunged for Theo's gun. Mateo went for Silas. Silas, weak from blood loss, sidestepped the knife, grabbing a thick, coiled mooring rope from the deck. As Mateo stumbled past, Silas swung the heavy, wet rope like a whip. It wrapped around Mateo's ankles, a perfect cast. Silas yanked, and the enforcer went down hard, his head striking the metal deck. He did not get up. The boat groaned, a horrible screech of metal on concrete. The Arcadia was turning, its bow drifting toward the massive central pylon of the bridge. They were going to collide. June ignored the fight. She ran past the men, into the pilot house. The crew had abandoned it. The wheel was useless without power. She saw the emergency brake, a massive red lever marked "Emergency Full Stop." It was a manual anchor. She threw her entire body weight onto it. The boat shuddered violently, the sound of anchor chains screaming as they deployed. It stopped, a mere 10 yards from the bridge pillar. Safe. The sound of new engines cut through the rain. Blue and red lights flooded the deck. It was not the NOPD, it was the harbor wardens, the Independent Port Authority, the real ones, alerted by Nomi. They swarmed the boat, their weapons drawn. They cuffed the groaning Mateo. They hauled a sputtering Bram Kincaid to his feet, securing his hands. Marin Duplessis was at the stern, trying to lower a life raft. When Darla found him, he froze. "We were family," Marin, Darla said, her voice aching with the betrayal. Marin looked at the dark water, then back at her. He stopped fighting. He slowly raised his hands, his eyes wet, not from the rain, but from the crushing weight of his own failure. He let them take him. On the deck, Silas's knees buckled. The adrenaline was gone. June caught him, her small frame straining under his weight. "It is over," she whispered, easing him down to sit on a bench. He looked at her, his face streaked with rain and blood. He cupped her face, his thumb wiping a drop of water from her cheek. She silenced him with a kiss. It was not the slow, exploratory kiss from the greenhouse. This was desperate, trembling and salty with rain. It was the kiss of 2 people who had walked through hell and found each other on the other side. A survivor's kiss. A cheer went up, not from the boat, but from the shore. On the bridge pillar, Nomi's projection had changed. The graph was gone. In its place, in massive white letters, MCB is a fraudulent enterprise. All evidence submitted to federal authorities. On the shore, the mayor, surrounded by cameras, was forced to speak. "In light of this shocking evidence, I am immediately ordering the temporary dissolution of the Metropolitan Commerce Bureau, pending a full federal investigation." The boat finally docked, guided in by the wardens. As June and an injured Silas walked down the gangplank, a small figure broke through the police line. "Mommy." Rowan launched himself into her arms. June held him, burying her face in his hair, inhaling the scent of her son. Safe. Silas stood beside them, his injured arm supported by a paramedic. He looked at the boy, then at June. Slowly. He reached out his good hand and placed it on Rowan's head. It was not a claim, it was a promise. The old vow, now a new oath. 6 weeks later, the city was still breathing out the poison. A federal grand jury, presented with the unencrypted ledgers from the gala, moved with stunning speed. Bram Kincaid was indicted on 27 counts of racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy. Moran Duplessis, facing the collapse of his entire life, signed a cooperation agreement, his testimony the final nail in the MCB's coffin. And Theo Rashid, his face aged a decade, stood before a judge. He pled guilty to all charges. He testified for 3 days, detailing not only the MCB's scheme but also the Gulf Meridian crew's operations and, crucially, the threats against his family. In light of his full confession and the duress involved, the judge sentenced him to 5 years of probation and mandatory community service rebuilding the new independent port authority he had almost destroyed. The old world was being dismantled, piece by piece. Silas Valario began his own cleansing. He dissolved 40% of his father's gray market operations, the shadowy parts of the family business he had always despised. He liquidated the assets and moved the capital, millions of dollars, into 2 ventures, a fully legitimate logistics company and a new foundation. The Rowan and Loretta Fund, a scholarship program for single-parent families in the quarter. St. Orpheus reopened its heavy oak doors, not with a quiet night, but with a celebration. A new sign hung by the entrance, "Jazz for Dock Workers." The first night was free for every port employee who showed up. The club was alive again. Next door, where a derelict storage unit had been, a new set of windows gleamed. A simple, hand-painted sign read Bayou and Basil. It was June's. She was the co-owner. The menu was hers, filled with the food she had grown up on, elevated, and on opening night in the gleaming new kitchen. Silas Valario stood beside her. He was awkward, out of place in a chef's apron, his left arm still in a sling, but he was meticulously, if slowly, learning how to chop onions. June's old life was gone. Kendrick's Vale had seen to that. He had her false arrest record expunged. The Family Risk Division was exposed in the media as a shell entity for blackmail and was formally disbanded. The threat to Rowan was not just gone, it was erased, as if it had never been. That night, after the last customer had left Bayou and Basil, Silas took her hand. He did not say anything, just led her from the bustling kitchen, up the private stairs, to the one place that was truly theirs. The rooftop greenhouse was quiet, the city lights a soft glitter below. The storm was a memory, but the scent of basil and mint remained, a permanent perfume. He turned to her in the dim, warm air. "This is where it began," he said, his voice low, "where I first saw you." "You saw an asset," when she teased gently. "I saw everything," he corrected, his good hand coming up to trace her jawline. He drew her in, and the kiss was long and deep, a stark contrast to the desperate, rain-soaked embrace on the boat. This was slow and sure, and filled with a profound, unspoken relief. His hand moved from her jaw, down her neck, to her waist. His touch was a question, a memory of that first night, and she answered by leaning into him, guiding his hand, a silent, absolute affirmative. Layers fell away. There was no rush, no fear, the buttons of her shirt, the silk of his. The air was warm on their skin. He whispered against her throat, "You are safe with me, June." And the words were not just a promise. They were the foundation of this new world. He was the most dangerous man in New Orleans, and she had never, in her entire life, felt more secure. The scene faded, the golden lamplight of the greenhouse blurring, leaving 2 figures finally, completely, at peace in each other's embrace. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the penthouse. June was making coffee, wearing his shirt again. It felt less like armor now, and more like home. "I have a rule," she said, as he came up behind her, wrapping his good arm around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "I am listening," he murmured, his lips against her skin. "Transparency, the old life. I know it is not entirely gone. I am not naive." She turned in his arms to face him. "If you have to use that side of yourself, the violence, if it is to protect us, to protect this family, you do it. But you tell me, after, no more secrets, no more shadows between us." He held her gaze, understanding the weight of her request. She was not asking him to be a different man. She was asking him to be her man. "I agree," he said, his voice absolute. He reached into his pocket. It was not a diamond. It was not a grand gesture. It was a simple, brushed gold band. When she looked closer, she saw it was delicately carved, the intricate steel arches of the Crescent City connection bridge wrapping around it. "It is not a wedding ring," he said quickly, as if afraid she would misunderstand. "It is a promise. It is the bridge, June, between your world and mine, the one we built together." He slid it onto her finger. Later that week, Rowan sat at the edge of the St. Orpheus stage, his legs dangling. The band's drummer had given him a small snare and a set of brushes. He was tapping away. His timing surprisingly good, a huge smile on his face. Silas sat at a table near the front, not drinking, just watching. The old, hard edges of the boss were still there, but his eyes, as they watched the boy, were different. They were the eyes of a man who had something to lose, the eyes of a father. The 6 o'clock news was playing on the television above the bar. The anchorwoman was smiling. And in city news, the mayor today signed the permanent dissolution of the Metropolitan Commerce Bureau. The independent harbor wardens have been granted full, permanent authority, heralding a new era of clean and transparent ports for New Orleans. Justice. It was quiet, but it was real. The final night of the Jazz Fest was a city-wide celebration. The Arcadia Steamboat, repaired and under new management, was not a gala venue. It was a public stage. June stood on the top deck, the humid night air warm. She heard the cheer before she saw him. Silas, his sling finally gone, his step confident, joined her at the railing. The crowd below, the people of New Orleans, saw them. They were a symbol now. The waitress and the boss who had taken on the system and won. The band hit a high note. The first fireworks of the finale exploded over the river, painting the sky in brilliant green and gold. Silas looked at June, his eyes reflecting the light. He took her hand. "What is next?" she asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Everything, man," he replied. He kissed her, and the crowd roared. It was not an ending. It was a beginning, sealed with a kiss, under a sky full of fire, with the promise of a future, finally, truly, their own. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment below and let us know where you are listening from. We would love to connect and share our thoughts. We invite you to subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.